You decided to improve your drone cinematics. You have a GoPro, you read somewhere or you watched somewhere that if you buy the ND filters, the footage will be more cinematic. You bought the ND filters, you put the ND filter on your GoPro, and then you discover that, well, it doesn't really look more cinematic, it maybe even look worse. What's going on? Is everybody lying about the ND filters? No, but they do not tell you all of the truth. To have the correct exposure, the correct amount of the light has to reach the sensor and be digitized. In still photography, the amount of light that is recorded by the sensor is determined by how much light is on the scene, how sensitive the sensor is, for how long the shutter was open, for how long the light was allowed to reach the sensor, and how open the lens was. What was the aperture of the lens? In case of video, it's slightly more complex because you do not have the full control or for how long the shutter will be open. To have the cinematic-like look of the video, you have to open the shutter only for the specific amount of time. Usually this is twice the frame rate, but to be honest it applies only for the 24 frame rate. Still, we assume that this is correct. When you are recording with either 25-30, then you should open the shutter for 150 or 160. If you are recording with 60 FPS, then you have to open it for 120 or something like that. Believe it or not, but 100 of the second can be really a lot of time. In case of the real camera, you still have the option to lower the sensitivity of the sensor or just make the aperture smaller. However, in case of the GoPro, you have a problem because the GoPro has the fixed aperture. Depending on the version, is either f/2.5 or 2.8, and the minimum sensitivity of the sensor is 100 ISO. Assuming that you are filming in the direct sunlight EV16 and you enter those values into any photographic calculator, you will quickly find out that the correct exposure time would be 1/8000 of the second. And 1/8000 of the second is not even close to 100 of the second. Will the video look bad with such a short shutter speed? No, not really, because the camera will handle the light correctly. However, you will lose one very specific thing: the motion blur. More than 100 years of the cinematography taught us how much of the motion blur you should see on the video. With the speeds that FPV drones can reach, it would be quite a lot of the motion blur. However, when you are filming with the 1/8000 of the second shutter speed, there will be just absolutely zero motion blur at all. None. Non-existent, nada. And us, our eyes and our brains expect to see a specific amount of the motion blur to say, well, yes, this looks cinematic. Because if it doesn't look like something recorded with the proper cinematic camera, then how can it be cinematic? And here comes the ND filters. ND filters reduce the amount of light that are getting through. And that's all. The perfect ND filter does not modify the frame absolutely, besides allowing you to open the shutter for longer, so you have the expected amount of motion blur that your brain expects to see on the shot. Okay, you bought the ND8, which some people say is the best density of the ND filter. You slapped it on your camera and, well, it changed nothing. Exactly, it changed nothing because the density of the ND filter should be chosen based on the light conditions outside. Let's go back to our previous example. If back then, without any ND filter, we had to open the shutter for 1/8000 of the second, but with ND8, which passes 1/8 of the light, for how long the shutter should be open? 1000 of the second. And this is not even close to expected 100 of the second. For the modern GoPros, the rule of thumb is direct sunlight, ND32. Sunny day with some clouds, still ND32, you might think about ND16. And only on the cloudy day or in the evening, you can go with the ND8. Rules of a thumb are usually just guessing. If you would like to know which ND filter you should put, well, I'm using the light meter application on my smartphone. It allows me to use either the built-in light sensor on my smartphone or enter the light value in EV units directly. I set up aperture, I set up ISO, I set up the type of the ND filter, and I know if the expected shutter speed is something that you, cinematic viewers, might expect or not. But can you see the difference with or without the ND filter? Well, yes, but really not always. It always depends on the speed your drone is reaching and how much of the motion blur there should be. Of course, with the correctly open shutter, you will see the motion blur. And the more motion blur you will see, the further away from the center of the screen you will go. If everything is done correctly, the corners of the video should be really blurry. Some people might like it, some people might not like it, but this is more or less how the cinematic correctly set up camera would record this image. In the speeds the drones can reach, there would be a lot of the motion blur on the edges of the screen. And the final thought is, there are good ND filters and there are cheap ND filters, and they never mix. My advice, do not buy cheap ND filters, because almost all cheap ND filters have a problem. They add a tint to your video, they can reduce the contrast, and at the end the image just look worse than before. Forget about the cheapest crap from AliExpress. Those cheapest ND filters from AliExpress are worth nothing. Do not use them, do not put them on anything. I got myself a set on the Polar Pro ND filters, which were like 80-90 bucks, kinda pricey still. They are almost really true natural density. They do not affect the contrast, they do not affect any flares, and they do not add any tint. Yeah, of course, you can buy cheap filters and try to fix everything in post-production by doing color correction, you know, adding the slider with the contrast to this side, the white balance to the other, and maybe it will look similarly. But my time is kinda expensive. I just went for the simpler, unfortunately more expensive solution. If you would like to know more on how to set up your GoPro for drone usage, here is the video for you. Watch it, you will not regret it. I'm Paweł Spychalski, thank you very much for watching, and like always, happy flying!